Foxes have dens and birds have nests, but the kid had nowhere to lay his head. The governor would soon meet the kid, for W.H. Bonney sent this letter to him at the governor's palace in Santa Fe. Dear Sir, I have heard that you will give $1,000 for my person, which, as I can understand, means alive as a witness against those that murdered Mr. Chapman. If it is required that I would appear at court, I have indictments against me for things that happened in the late Lincoln County War, and am afraid to give up because my enemies would kill me. If it is in your power to annul those indictments, I hope you will do so as to give me a chance to explain myself. I have no wish to fight any more. Indeed, I have not raised an arm since your November proclamation. Concerning my character, I refer you to any of the citizens of Lincoln, for the majority of them are my friends and have been helping me all they could. I am also called Kid Antrim, but Antrim is my stepfather's name. Waiting for an answer, I remain your obedient servant. The governor invited him to Santa Fe, and a gussied-up kid got there at night on March 17, 1879, St. Patrick's Day. The kid walked up to a one-story, 350-foot-wide, porticoed Spanish palace of whitewashed adobe that was constructed in the 1600s. He knocked many times on a rough door of sawn wood, and it was finally opened by an annoyed official in a frock suit who flinched at seeing the kid's Winchester rifle and holstered six-shooter. "You must be Kid Bonney." "Yes, sir." "You're late. Had to ride forever to get here. Hand over your weapons." With some hesitation, the kid did as instructed, and as the official carried them away, he told the kid, "The governor is still dining. Wait for him in his office." He nodded his head. End of the hallway. Heel-thumping boot steps caused the kid to scurry from behind the desk and stand beside a yellow tapestried armchair. The patrician governor hurried in, wearing a dark broadcloth suit and worrying his mouth with a toothpick as he glanced at Billy and said, "Sit," then paused as he sternly added, "And take off your hat in a governor's presence." The kid complied. "I'm just hoping for a clean slate and citizenhood. Your note gave me promise of absolute protection." "Yes, and I shall be true to that promise." Rereading the kid's letter, Lew Wallace asked, "You mention indictments. What kind?" "Territorial for killing of Sheriff William Brady, but I was just one of a half-dozen shooters, and he deserved to die. The federal one was for killing of Andrew Roberts on the Mescalero Reservation, which I definitely did not do. The kid forgot to mention his killing of Windy Cahill in self-defense, but Arizona seemed to have forgotten that, too." "You would end up testifying against yourself, in all likelihood." "And that means?" "Histories and narratives that would include your own activities. But that's neither here nor there, for I am prepared to offer you clemency in return for your full, accurate, and truthful testimony before a grand jury." "Clemency?" "Leniency, forbearance. You'll go scot-free with my own official pardon for all your prior misdeeds." The kid said he liked the sound of that, but confessed the fear that those criminals he named would have him killed. Wallace told him he'd order a sham arrest and lock him in handcuffs, then jail him with instructions of protective custody. The government would also be arresting those involved in the homicide of Houston Ingraham Chapman. And now, if the terms were agreeable to him, he could begin naming names. "We ought to have all this in writing," Billy said. The kid failed to understand the governor's sneer as he said, "Not until I have your testimony," which he guessed was a reasonable hitch to the bargain. The kid offered the names of those who had joined in the parley on February 18th, and then, with hesitation, he asked, "You are staying put as governor, right?" and shooed the petty criminal off, saying, I have to get back to my novel. Acting on further information, the governor sent a 60-man cavalry detachment to Jimmy Dolan's Carrizozo Ranch and overwhelmed William Campbell, Jacob B. Matthews, and Jesse Evans, who were arrested and taken to the Fort Stanton stockade. But Jesse Evans and Billy Campbell convinced an infantry recruit from Texas to help them slink out of their loose imprisonment. Evans seemed to have the kid's knack for getting out of jails. Billy Campbell skedaddled for Texas, as Evans put it, and was never heard from again. Worried that the escapees would be seeking vengeance, the kid and Tom Folliard volunteered to be handcuffed by Sheriff George Kimbrell and were escorted to a friendly confinement in Juan Patron's store, where they played Mexican Monte with the sheriff and other visitors, and the kid won big as the house bank. Writing of their jailing to the Secretary of the Interior, Wallace sarcastically noted, "A precious specimen named the Kid, whom the sheriff is holding in the plaza, as it is called, is an object of tender regard. Singing and music can be heard in the night as minstrels of the village actually serenade the fellow in his prison." Judge Warren Bristol and District Attorney William Logan Reinerson got to Fort Stanton for the grand jury proceedings on Sunday, April 13th, and immediately confirmed the habeas corpus petitions, writs against illegal imprisonment, that were submitted on behalf of 15 men associated with robberies and murder in the Lincoln County War. The 15 were released from the fort stockade after "go and sin no more" instructions from Judge Bristol. The grand jury was constituted with friends of Alexander McSween and handed down some 200 indictments against Lieutenant Colonel Dudley and ex-sheriff Dad Pepin for arson, against Billy Campbell, Jimmy Dolan, and their accessory Jesse Evans for the homicide of Houston Chapman, 100 against people already dead, and 1 against Tom Folliard for horse theft. Tom Folliard and J.B. Matthews were interrogated about their activities and, according to a prior agreement, were then given immunity from further prosecution under the governor's proclamation of amnesty. But when the kid offered his full, accurate, and truthful testimony about the night of Houston Chapman's murder, and waited for District Attorney Reinerson to do just as he'd done for Tom and J.B., instead, the scowling and freakishly tall and Rasputin-like Reinerson objected. "We find in the law no precedence for the governor's presumption of the right to offer a homicidal felon a promise of clemency. The state therefore requests a continuance of prosecution." Judge Bristol granted it. Sidney Wilson then took up the defense of Jimmy Dolan, urging a change of venue to Doña Ana County, for the partisan feelings in Lincoln County made a fair trial of his client impossible. Judge Bristol agreed. The kid's hearing for the murder of Sheriff Brady was shifted there as well.
The reason for that change of venue that Jimmy Dolan had asked for was because Jimmy Dolan had had a lot of men killed, and the people of Lincoln County didn't particularly like him. But to have the kids' trial, the venue of the kids' trial changed, was devastating for him, because if he'd been tried in Lincoln County, he would have been acquitted. But by moving it, they were guaranteeing that the people there did not know him personally and would only have heard of him, and he would probably be found guilty. And that's exactly what happened.
Soon after the gavel fell on the grand jury proceedings, Fort Stanton also hosted the military court of inquiry that was meant to establish if Lieutenant Colonel Dudley should be court-martialed for the arson of the McSween residence, abetting in Alex's murder, looting the Tunstall mercantile store, and procuring base and wicked men to make false and slanderous charges against Mrs. McSween in order to ruin her reputation. The first to testify on the witness stand was His Excellency Governor Lew Wallace, who was humiliated by Henry Waldo, a partner in the firm of Catron and Elkins. Then William Bonney, called the Kid, also Antrim, took the stand and answered Waldo's questions in general regarding where were you on the 19th of July last, and what, if anything, did you see of the movements and actions of the troops that day? After 2 tiring days of telling and retelling what happened during the big killing, Billy was told, "You may retire." Ira Leonard sent a pessimistic report to the governor, calling Dudley impetuous, vindictive, overbearing, self-conceited, and meddlesome, and noting, "I am thoroughly and completely disgusted with their proceedings." The Kid registered his own disgust on June 17, 1879, by wringing the iron cuffs off his hands and dangling the irons to his hospitable jailers in the Juan Patron store, saying, "Boys, I'm tired of this," and then just walking out the door and heading toward Fort Sumner on his stabled horse. Foxes have dens and birds have nests, but the Kid had nowhere to lay his head. Either he slept in rooms above the saloons in Puerto de Luna and Anton Chico, or he overnighted with Doc Scurlock in Fort Sumner, Hargrove's saloon. Walking across the parade, "Me till I'm drunk with you." She did. On January 10th, 1880, faithful Tom Folliard visited from wherever, and since he'd been alone for weeks, he was in the mood for a rollick and soon grew tired of the smallness and innkeeper calm at Beaver Smith's, harassing the Kid to find him some action and sporting ladies in Bob Hargrove's saloon. Walking across the parade grounds in front of the Maxwell house and in a hunker from the sleeping cold, the Kid was called to by Jim Chisholm, Uncle John's younger brother, who'd been in conversation with Pete Maxwell on the front porch. Pete offered a friendly wave and went back inside the former officer's quarters as Jim and one of his hands, a Jack Finan, hurried through the gate of the picket fence to interrogate them. Jim told the Kid and Tom that he'd been retrieving stolen cattle in Canyon Cueva near the village of Juan de Dios. Would the Kid know anything about that? The Kid said he didn't. Jim and Jack squinted their eyes at him. "I'll grant you I have rustled from time to time, but not in this particular instance." Jack Finan said, "Pete says you probably did." "Pete says a lot of things, and he lies like a no-legged dog." Tom was hugging himself as he asked, "How long we gonna stand out here? I'm frozen." The Kid asked, "Would you galoots like to join us in Hargrove's, just to let bygones be bygones? I'm buying." Jim Chisholm dithered a little, but Jack Finan scoured the Kid with his glower. The Kid chose to take note of Jack's gun, an ivory-handled Colt single-action Army revolver that shone like new chrome. "You got a handsome hog leg in that scabbard." "Cost me plenty," Jack said, his face hinting at a readiness to smile. "Could I heft it?" Jack was tentative as he handed it to him. The Kid felt its weight, tested its balance, spun it on his trigger finger, and looked down the barrel at the front sight as he aimed at a sheet of newspaper flying on the wind. "Go ahead and try it," Jack said. The Kid shot, and the sheet of newspaper swatted. "Wow," he said, just to be charming. He fired again with his left hand, and the first bullet hole got larger. His third shot from hip high was elsewhere on the page. "Enviable piece," the Kid said. And because they were heading into a public place, he half-turned the cylinder so that the hammer was on the first spent shell and couldn't misfire. Jack took the pistol back with satisfied pride. Even in mid-afternoon there was the noise of someone cranking organ music from a hurdy-gurdy, the hee-haws of drunken laughter at the long bar, and 4 flirting daughters of joy in frilly full-length white dresses inveigling fallen men. Red-haired Tom went to one who was no prettier than the others and confided a few sentences. She tugged him by the hand into the stalls in back. The kid bought pints of Anheuser-Busch for Chisholm and Finan and got a porcelain cup of coffee for himself, and then he heard a drunk yell, "Are you Bunny? I's here a-lookin' for Kid Bunny." The kid leaned toward the mixologist. "You know who that is?" "Says he's Joe Grant. Says they call him Texas Red." "Stewed?" "Half a quart of our rot gut so far." The kid waved his hand and called, "Kid Bunny, over here." Jim Chisholm whispered, "You need help, just say so." Widening his winter coat to give freedom to his six-shooter, the kid said, "I'll deal with it." Joe Grant was zigzagging over to him, skidding off the backs of drinkers and swinging his forearm at the vexation or bumping chairs into screeching changes of position. His hand gripped the bar to hold himself upright. He was fat and hatless, and the fringe of auburn beard at his jaw so matched the fringe on his skull that the kid thought his chapped, round face would look pretty much the same upside down. "So, you Bunny?" "William H. Bunny." "We got a score to settle." "Why don't I buy you a shot or two of fire starter and you can tell me all about it?" "Had enough for now." Weaving and seeming about to fall, Joe Grant's unfocused glances around himself fell on Jack Finan's fancy .45. "Let me see that gun." The kid nodded in permission, and Jack handed it over. Grant admired it for a second, then asked, "What was I saying?" "Shetling something," the kid said. Here, Grant said to Finan. "My gun while I'm looking." Exchanging weapons, he shoved his own pistol into Jack's holster. Then he lewdly licked the shining barrel and ivory handle of the Colt with his own pitiful impression of rapier wit. "She's so purty." "So," the kid patiently said, "what's your plan?" His face hardened. "I'm gonna kill you afore you do." A reverent, church-like silence took over as hard-bitten cowhands and gunmen in the saloon edged away from the forecast's confrontation, not wanting to get anything on them. The kid chose to be pacifying. "Oh, what do you want to kill anybody for, Joe? Give Jack his pistol and let's solve the world's problems with whiskey." Joe Grant was shaking his head from side to side. "Nope, mine's made up." But then he tilted a little as he uncertainly focused on Jim Chisholm. "You, Uncle John, have to kill Chisholm first." His halitosis could frazzle houseplants. Jim and Jack's hands were easing down to their holsters as the kid lifted his hand in the halt sign. "Hold on, Joe. You got the wrong sow by the ear. This is Jim Chisholm, Uncle John's brother, and he done nothing to you." "Well, I got this shiny gun, and she's all go." "Shall I show you to the door? Walk with me outside." The kid strolled from Joe Grant's fuddled menace toward the saloon doors, the ever-so-quiet crowd dividing for him as he heard Jim Chisholm call out, "Kid!" and then heard the click as the hammer cocked and snapped onto an empty chamber. The kid hesitated and heard another snap as, in frustration, Joe Grant tried to kill him again. And then the kid ducked and twisted around in a crouch and, in a sudden rage and viciousness, fired his own Colt 3 times. Bang, bang, bang! Each shot hitting Joe Grant in the chin in a gruesome destruction that was the size of a fist. Grant was dead so quick there was no chance for reaction or even for pain. He fell against the footrail of the bar, and his body sagged gradually to the floor, blood eddying from him. The kid considered his victim and said, Sorry, Joe, but I've been there too often. Recalling Windy Cahill and Arizona, he looked around through the acrid gray haze of gun smoke. The saloon customers were still holding their ears from the noise and cautiously inching away, like this was finally the frightening kid they'd heard so much about. You saw what happened, right? It was self-defense. He was spoiling for it, a far-off man yelled out. Another man agreed. You had yourself no option in the matter. Jack Finan bent down to extract his ivory-handled .45 from the corpse's surprisingly firm grip. We'll clean all this up, the bartender said, but you better go, kid. Tom Folliard had heard the shots and was running into the main room, his face full of horror as he buttoned up his trousers. What'd I miss? With the jazzy exhilaration he always felt when he found himself still alive, the kid told him, Oh, nothing. It was a game of two, and I got there first. Because Celso wanted his company, and because Saval was still
a traveling photographer arrived in Fort Sumner, New Mexico. Dusty and bedraggled, the kid decided to pose for a 25-cent tintype.
What was it like holding the only photo, the only known photo of Billy the Kid in my hand? Because in 2010, the photograph went up for auction, and Brian LaBelle, who ran the auction at the Denver Mart in Denver, he brought it out to the True West World headquarters in Cave Creek, and I actually got to hold it. It's like the size of a credit card. I'm not one of those guys. I'm not the cosmic cowboy. I'm not the guy who goes like, "Oh, I can see," But I felt like you could see down in it. I felt the presence of the kid. I felt it was very, very heavy, being able to actually look at that. And then I was there in Denver when it was auctioned, and I asked Brian LaBelle. I said, "What do you think the photo's going to go for?" And he said, "We're thinking about $400,000." I think the biggest photo probably was 30 grand, maybe 100 grand had been the record. Jesse James. Interesting is that when the kid was in jail in Santa Fe, New Mexico, after Pat Garrett captured him at Stinking Spring and brought him to Santa Fe, the reporter's in there talking to the kid, and he says, "Hey, you're getting kind of famous. What do you think?" And the kid says a really curious thing. He says, "There's no money in it." And that's just so ironic to me, because he paid a quarter for that photo. All right, needed to hang on to it a little longer. But those kind of things just fascinate me so much. The little details of there's no money in it. That's ridiculous.
That picture was taken, they doctored it. Okay, they tried to repair it from the get-go. And it was badly done, it was botched. And so what you saw, instead of this smart little Irish kid, you saw a moron. And so America only heard of this dirty little Billy killer, and there's his picture. Look, he's a moron. Well, nothing was farther from the truth.
The newspaper reporters are allowed in, and they get to talk to the kid. And as he's talking to the reporters, the kid says, "This is good. Maybe people will think I'm half human now, because they haven't thought I was human before. They've considered me an animal. Maybe now they'll think I'm half human."
He did look human indeed, one reporter wrote. There was nothing very mannish about him in his appearance, for he looked and acted like a schoolboy, with the traditional silky fuzz on his upper lip and clear blue eyes with a roguish snap about them.
He was always looking for a family. He wanted a home, and that's the one thing that he never really had and couldn't get. But I think he felt that Fort Sumner was home.